Really, really thrilled to have all of you here. And we're going to have a great conversation today, really continuing what we've been talking about earlier in the product keynote about AI. What I want to do is really bring it to life. And I think the thing that's kind of interesting about this, as I've thought about our evolution here at Medallia and a lot of different organizations' evolution, it kind of made me think of something that like professors in business school teach a lot. Really, this idea of like an iron triangle: speed, quality, cost. And you have to pick two. Can't have all three because there's compromises on every side of this, right? So you can have fast and cheap, but it's probably going to be garbage. You can have fast and high quality, but it'll cost you a fortune. There's this idea of kind of compromises all around this. And I think a lot of businesses, as they've thought about automation and kind of basic levels of AI, not generative AI, but I think the obsession has been on this idea of fast and cheap. And I think in this type of engineering, we've actually automated a lot of the humanity out of these processes, right? Optimizing for this transaction, but maybe not the interaction around it as a whole. But here's the thing. I think with generative AI, and when I see some of the things that we've rolled out that are really kind of out there with the frontier AI models available, I actually think the triangle that we kind of believed in is actually broken. And what we're finding now is that companies that are scaling agentic AI and scaling even some of the Medallia AI products, they're actually finding ways to contain costs on their side. In fact, a recent study came out saying about, 15% or so, drop in costs, but also increasing overall customer satisfaction and quality by 20%. So really, this idea of kind of like the overall curve and the curve of compromise being broken, I think is really interesting. And I think right now, really what we're seeing is this idea of, you know, competency on demand from AI. You can actually get high quality and a fast, very quick delivery, and it maybe isn't always all that expensive either. So we're going to go beyond the hype of all of this. There's a ton of hype. There's way more hype than I think anything probably in my professional career. Like if you actually think about what people are talking about, we're not going to be talking about delving into a tapestry of synergy or any other word salads. We're going to talk to actual companies that are doing this in their businesses with Medallia and what they're seeing. And I think we have a great panelist of leaders here. We actually have a company that's joining us where they're building homes, the most consequential thing in any person's life, and the purchase that they'll make to build their home. One of the world's largest marketplaces that's available is going to be here, and then a company that's operating a full-blown city within a city. So I'd like to welcome our panelists up here, and we're going to have a conversation about this. So please welcome Alex, Terry, and Colby to the stage. Excellent. And if you forget what we look like, I guess our faces are going to be up there the whole time as well. So hopefully we're close enough to that. Okay. Well, why don't you guys introduce yourselves? I kind of took a swing at it. But Alex, maybe starting with you, tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, kind of what you're doing and where you're operating.
Alex Lopez. I am the head of global research for the RB Auctions. RB Global is the world's largest auction company of commercial assets for agriculture or construction and vehicles. We have locations across 13 countries. We have 13 or 14 brands, and we have customers from 170 countries.
So I'm Terry from Venetian Resort Las Vegas. So short commute. I'm just 2.5 years at Venetian Resort. Venetian 26 years ago was born as an homage to Venice and Italian culture. And I feel like the folks that have run Venetian over that time have just done an amazing job of making that vision bigger and better every year to where we got to today. I like to say Venetian's equal parts big and beautiful. We're the biggest resort in North America with 7,100 all-suite guest rooms, 2 big casinos, over 80 food and beverage outlets. We can host the largest meetings or expos on the Las Vegas Strip in our Expo and Convention Center. Really just an endless maze of things to do and get engaged in. We'd like to say we'd like to make Venetian your reason to visit Las Vegas, not that you're visiting the Venetian while you visit, because we like to keep you inside while you're there. On the beautiful side, there's the Italian architecture, the painted ceilings, 2 sets of canals. I like to say one of the most beautiful parts of Venetian are the 8,500 team members that bring that to life every day. That's a hardworking group.
Excellent. you haven't been there yet on your trip, it's really nearby. Don't want to take too much business away from the win, but like, yeah, go to the Venetian and check it out. It's pretty. And I wanted to show, if you haven't been to their YouTube, they've got some crazy, wild marketing and advertising. Terry wouldn't let me show the video here. I wanted to, but you can check it out on your own. Some really cool content. Colby with Sekisui House.
My likelihood to recommend is like on 11, got married. We were talking before we came up here on stage, and I've come back to the Venetian numerous times. So second it, if you haven't been there, come. I am Colby. I get to lead the customer experience initiative for Sekisui House US. We have quietly become the 5th largest home builder in the United States. And our vision is really to drive homes and home living, not just home building, but how you live in your home. By making home the happiest place in the world. And we do that through our love of humanity. So as a takeaway, does anybody have an idea what the optimum angle is for your toilet handle coming out of the bathroom? We have studied this in our research center in Osaka. I work for Disney. I'm not kidding. It's 15 degrees, right? The optimum angle for a grab bar in a bathroom is 15 degrees.
Well, I think everybody's spouses are really thankful because you just gave them another thing to fix the house, right? That's one thing I think, like, I'm gonna have that conversation with my spouse when I get home to make sure. But excellent. So very diverse backgrounds, very different businesses, and that's really why we assembled this group, right? I think it's really kind of interesting, and there's a few things I want to get into here. When I think of AI, right, we often kind of measure success as seconds saves, right? Like time to action, like getting the insight that you need. But really, I think the quality of the interaction is often what matters, perhaps even more, especially in our industries. We're all dealing with industries. These are high value purchases for those of you represented on stage. So I want to talk about this area and maybe perhaps kind of talk about this idea of like, an agent having to deliver a hard, message or something like that. But how has smart response kind of changed that whole dynamic of the interaction for you all?
I sat through one of the sessions that you did, Terry, and you talked about how you were an early adopter of smart response and how it was kind of changing the way you guys were interacting with customers. And I sat in that room and I said, I want that. And I was lobbing screenshots to my salesperson who's in the room, to some of our managed services team who were online, to see how we could start using it. I was surprised. I'm usually not in front with AI. I have said for many years that pioneers get bloody, but settlers get the land. So I always like to be second or third wave. We had a lot of fear internally when we turned it on from our operators that it was going to depersonalize the experiences that our frontline were driving. Meaning it was going to be too easy for them just to fire something off, and they would lose some of that connective tissue to that customer feedback that is so important in our programs, and the opposite has happened. We started off with no real governance on it, just having it in there with some of our, out of the can responses that were the static ones. And we saw the adoption just like a rocket takeoff. We kind of trained some leaders on it, about a dozen or so, and then throughout the rest of the organization, it has gone nuts. And I am a firm believer in real experience starts with the inner loop. If we can't get that one-to-one dynamic correct with the majority of customers, doesn't matter what we do with the outer loop, right? Like we have got to make it kind of that personalized thing. And how many of you have filled out surveys? And what happens?
That's a void.
Nothing. It's a black hole. Our customers that are actually giving us feedback are investing time and their attention to us. And we've never been able before to say at least thank you with something personalized because of the scale of it. That's what Smart Response did for us. So including alerts, we were responding to about 33% of the feedback that came through from customers. And within 3 months of turning on Smart Response, we're now at 89% as of yesterday. Same time, same attention that the staff is giving it. And yet that connectivity that they've got with customers has just increased. We're creating more one-to-one relationships because of the engagement with that feedback.
I have the same exact story, but in kind of a opposite way. So I am actually, going first and try something when it's brand spanking new. So I was part of the early adopters group for AI features in Medallia. I mean, I begged and I pleaded to be on it. And finally, somebody heard me out. So I jumped on, tested it out myself. I was skeptical because, as a person who has used different LLMs, you know that hallucinations were a thing. And so I was skeptical on how effective it would be. But I'll tell you, it was excellent at writing in a way that was professional, engaging, that it sounded like our people, and just an overall really well crafted message. So I applied it and gave it to a couple teams, and we were, like Colby had mentioned, we were only responding to negative feedback. Turned it on, asked them to respond to positive. It does exceptionally well with positive feedback. They would read it through and make sure that everything sounds fantastic. They didn't need to add anything, and then they would launch it out and send a message back to the customers who typically went to just avoid after giving some positive feedback. I don't know if it's coincidental or now or not. So we have a little bit more research.
Yeah.
So it's correlated, but it's not necessarily the cause. But our score in this area jumped up 20 points after responding to our positive feedback. We also are covering about 95% of all surveys.
So you both mentioned something, and I think it sort of begs the question, right? And this is the question that we've had since way before smart response or generative AI could do this kind of thing. It's worth saying. So you both said, "Hey, we're responding to more customers, like we're responding to more clients when they come on board." But let's ask it again. Like, why even do that? Like, what is the actual benefit to you when you have that closed loop, right? I mean, whether it's AI or human, why was that important for you and your businesses to begin with?
Well, we're trying to establish a relationship with our customers that is authentic and true, so
Yeah.
that they see us as a preferred vendor in this space, right? There's a couple other companies that do what we do, and we want to make sure that we do it in the best way possible.
Mhm.
And so engagement with those customers, if they're spending time writing a message to us, being able to send that message back to say thank you, you are heard,
Yeah.
creates a tighter, more loyal customer that now, in the area that we turned it on, it was for transportation. Like I had mentioned, scores had gone up, and the number of requests of transportation services had also gone up after that first month of just turning it on. We find doing the right thing turns into dollars for us as
Sure.
well.
Terry, Colby, thoughts on that? Because again, like the old world of this, like we did close the loop. I mean, at one point people would do handwritten notes, and I'm sure it's still done in an environment like the Venetian in some high roller situation. I never get those notes, but I think like, it used to be an agent kind of looking at a cursor flashing on a blank screen, and then we got sort of canned responses. And Medallia I think we had a feature name for that called rapid response. I don't, but like, yeah, I mean, why even close the loop? Why is that important?
Yeah, we're a loyalty business too. People have a lot of great choices when they're deciding where to stay or do business in Las Vegas. So we get a mountain of feedback. Our opportunity to do closed loop feedback is almost unlimited. The business case for us has been pretty good. We've been able to respond to more guests, which is great. We've been able to do that with a little bit less investment in our service center. And the quality's been excellent. Like I thought for sure in the beginning we would give it a try, and eventually would have customers come back and blast us to say, "Oh, I stayed and I spent all this money at Venetian, and you sent me back a robot response." We've seen 0 of those in 1 year. So the combination of what's being produced and then the agent evaluating it, that process, and then sending has been a, winner for us. The business case that we set out to, we've exceeded on really on both sides. Okay.
Mm.
We put some work into it. Bill that's here from our team did a lot of the training and the tuning
Yep.
of the tool. So what you put into it matters too. But we've done a good job at adjusting that and continue as the business changes to look for those opportunities.
You brought up a really important point that I think so a lot of people have seen kind of like the AI magic stuff, like the presentation this morning and everything like that. I think that, the broader the context window, and what I mean by that is really the other parameters of data you put in, like the other unstructured components, perhaps like in an environment like hospitality, like the on-property ticketing. The more it has to chew on and digest, the more rich it becomes. It's no different from like an agent, right? Who has to like maybe flip between 5 or 6 different systems. If they have it all in front of them, then it can kind of respond in a more thoughtful, intelligent, efficient way. So I think you raise a really good point about kind of tuning it and making sure it's having that voice of the Venetian.
And if tuning it is easy, it's literally you're not in the back end writing code or anything. You're just talking to the LLM and saying, "Hey, provide this information instead of that in natural language." So
Interesting.
it's super easy.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, anybody can code now, right? So it doesn't really matter what that. Yeah, that's
Right.
I was the guy telling people who are pushing for AI within my org, you just hold, cool your jets gunpowder, right? Like let's just slow it down. And I had our first smart response up sitting in the Portland airport over a glass of wine or two, and had it done in like 15 minutes, and then just copy and pasted, and really within an hour there were the 6 starting smart responses that we're using now. And to the point of fine tuning it, the prompts that came out of the box were good. We found, at least for our org, we had to dumb it down just a little bit. Like we had to shoot for a like 8th, 9th grade reading writing level a little bit, because it was really polished. We've got a couple other things that are in there, but we have found the prompts are super easy to use, and you can have it up and running in no time. And then, you know, perfection sometimes is the enemy of progress. If you haven't started it yet, I would encourage, just get in there and play with it. You'd be amazed. We're seeing that connectivity with the customer increase significantly. So our frontline customer care agents are dealing with more customers more often. They're reading more of that feedback because we're now responding so often. They're now more aware than ever what surprise and delight looks like, and where the friction is that they can proactively start working at solving. So it's been a game changer for us.
one thing that's, I think, an interesting point of this. So there's kind of this discussion where it's like, okay, like they're just throwing a bot at me, like they're just throwing like a response, an AI thing. There's actually been some really interesting research on this. Yeah, I mean, there's bad perceptions of bots because we remember what bots used to be like 6 years ago, right? They were this kind of like decision tree thing, right? And it was just like a decision tree on like almost like, you call like an IVR system, and then you like get so frustrated you throw your phone in the ocean. That's the thing. That's the way bots used to be. But obviously this is different. So customer expectations and their interests are actually kind of like, look, I don't care if it's a machine or a human. I just want my problem fixed, and this thing is doing it quickly. So that's the other thing that's kind of interesting. I think you both kind of touched on it a bit.
I got a call from one of our customer care leaders in Northern California just a couple weeks ago. And he said, Colby, you won't believe this. I just got a call from a customer. I hit send on my smart response to him 5 minutes ago. And the guy picked up the phone and dialed my phone number on the bottom of it and said, are you a real person? And they then had a conversation about how we listen, we care, and we act on their feedback, right?
Wow.
Think about that for a second. Like,
That's-
no, we read every single piece that comes through, right? And we care about your feedback. And through our research and everything else, we're learning not only how to make your experience better for you, but we're learning how to make home living better for all of our future customers. And I firmly believe that fundamentally changes the relationship with the customer. My customer journey is sometimes 2.5 years long, from when somebody decides to buy a home, for when they've picked out all their options, when sticks come out of the ground, they finally move in, plus the warranty period, or it could be, 12, 13 months, but that's still a really long customer journey. You think people are more or less likely to give us feedback if they think we're listening and we care and that their feedback matters, right?
Mm. Yeah, it's super interesting. And so that's one component, obviously, kind of the conversational component of AI. I'd like to kind of shift now to the sort of the solving the mystery type side. For a lot of us in CX, obviously closing the loop, we talked about, but I think sometimes there's kind of this idea of like, okay, I need to go in and like get the data that I need to. So in the past, the way this worked is you may have a spike in complaints, and then that would trigger an investigation, and you're kind of dancing around systems, maybe doing some data analysis. I mean, this is still being done, right? Like you get a question from the board and you got to go figure it out. Walk us through how root cause assist, kind of could allow you to sort of, maybe bypass some of the guesswork and start to pinpoint more specific issues.
We have literally every month at Venetian amazing conversations of stakeholders about really complex guest issues, right?
Okay.
Strategy, execution, costs. We're almost back to your triangle that you started with, right? To say, how are we going to work this all out for the be the best spot we can be for guests, Venetian, and everyone involved, right? We had all these conversations. frequently those conversations, if you don't have something to start with, like a source of truth or facts or a summary of some sort, start with everyone just saying their opinion or what they saw or what they heard. It takes a long time to get past all that. Sometimes it's hard to get past all that to a place where you can say, okay, how are we going to move this into action that gets a result that everyone's happy with? So maybe a little different than the root cause assist, just the intelligent summaries have been helpful to us. I could think of a situation where we were off to a slow start to our pool business one year. Pools are a big business. We have 7 pools. If you look out there on a nice day in the summertime, every seat is full. They're a multi-million-dollar business in themselves, right? Food and beverage business. So there was concern. We're going where we want to do? Are we going to have a good pool season? So like different people, or if you just gave a list of feedback to different stakeholders, you would read it and come to different conclusions. Someone might say it's staffing. Someone else might say, oh, we're not clean and safe. A third person might say it's the products. It's difficult to get that started. And if you have an intelligent summary of some sort that has said, that's prioritized in some way what guests are saying and what volumes, you can speed past a lot of the just opinion sharing to say, let's get started with a set of facts and just have a lot better conversation about where we want to go. So speed to market for that has been great. I know there's people in the room that have had requests like late in the day or in the evening that said, can you tell us about this or that in the business? And then you say, well, when do you need it? And they say, well, for tomorrow's board meeting or something for the vendor, right? Who's ever made like tick mark sheets with a list of comments? I bet there's people in here, everyone's done it, right? So speeding past that with some of the newer tools is fantastic. And you can put your energy into the conversation and the action as opposed to doing the work of trying to figure all that out. So it speeds it all up and just makes it better.
Yeah, how often does that happen in the room where you bring an insight forward and, you're kind of trying to get to the root of something, and then you got 8 different explanations or excuses from the business where it's like, I think it's this. Everybody has their own spin on it. It's good to have, I kind of heard that everybody's trying to work towards a single source of truth. The single source of truth may or may not exist for all issues, but at least you have kind of an intelligent approach.
Every once in a while, though, it's nice to get the C-suite to play 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's have a thumb war, right?
Yeah.
Just sit back with the popcorn and let them fight it out, right? Right? It's great to have the answers.
Yes. And Alex, I think you had some thoughts on this too. The intelligent summary is root cause assist. Yeah.
It come from the one of the parent companies of RB Global, IAA. There was an acquisition, and with most acquisitions, there's a consolidation of employees. And so we had to do a lot more with a lot fewer people. And that's when AI had really started to, kick off. And before it was in Medallia, I was using a variety of tools, Copilot and whatnot, to get the insights quickly to the teams that needed it. One of the problems with using Copilot or any of the other tools is that when you do the data analysis, sometimes when you run it on data right now and then rerun it, you get different results. So what's the most important thing? It's a little bit different, and it's not terribly off, but it's enough to make you wonder: is this reading the right things? When Medallia turned on the themes for us, when we got early access, it solved those problems. So now when I take that data set and look at a specific time frame, I get the results from the themes. I get the intelligent summaries that I can deliver to our teams internally quickly. And next time I run it, it's going to be the same results. It's not going to change. Now I'm also able to take those features and hand them directly to the frontline staff so they can see those quick summaries of what's going on within their respective places.
I think that's a really good point you made there, specifically about different answers at different times with some of the other tools you're using, because generative AI is typically probabilistic, right? So you actually somewhat designed to give you different answers. But I think that the component that you mentioned in Medallia, where it actually is like, yeah, here's the answer, and this is the data. Like it actually kind of all in one. You all saw kind of versions of that today as well with some of the other features that are being rolled out. I think that's kind of a critical component for when you're doing this within the confines of a business. Because I think a probabilistic approach can work for if you're trying to decide where to eat dinner tonight, right? I mean, that's fine. But if you're actually kind of like saying, hey, I actually need to back up everything I'm saying with data, and the source data needs to be there. And yeah, also bring in some stuff I might not be thinking about that could be related. So I like that you brought that to life. And I think there's also this idea where kind of move up the value chain within an organization from kind of analyst mode to strategist mode.
Right.
right? I mean, have you found it, that you're saying kind of freed up some time to be able to kind of think of bigger picture things, perhaps?
100%, yeah. With the centralized CX team that we had before, we were able to kind of curate all of the actions and insights and the intelligence from our team and then deliver that to the organization. We changed our approach to be a hybrid approach of CX governance. And with that, I can actually instill certain CX experts within different teams, teach them on the tool sets, focus on the overarching changes and actions that we need as an organization, while they actually focus on the things that they can do within the relative teams to fix customer experience.
I find that as CX professionals, our circle of control is very small, but our circle of influence is significant, right?
Right.
We just don't have the bodies. We don't have the number. We don't have the team. Sometimes we don't have the funding. Developing high trust relationships with the people that will actually turn insights to action, or helping them figure out what those actions are, and speeding that up helps drive that, right? Because when mid levels, your SVP levels reporting up into the C suites, when we can enable them to not only understand what the insight is, but then to actually plan out and drive business changes that they can track, like almost in real time, in the quarter, for the quarter, in the month, for the month, A/B test different experiential things along the way. I have at least found more people are reaching out, asking more questions, wanting more assistance. Hey, we hear you have new toys in the toy box. How can my team start playing with those toys too?
It's interesting too, because I think it's something we've known as CX professionals for a while. Like sometimes our customers have the best ideas on how to fix the business, and jump in if you have anything that comes to mind. But I think sometimes that signal can get lost in the noise. If you're looking at large data sets, lots of dashboards, I mean, so sometimes the actual best ideas from customers or employees are kind of trapped in there somewhere. But obviously, through things like intelligent summaries or actually getting to the root cause, some of those things can bubble up a little easier. We have a little bit more time. And what I want to do, we've got a few more questions to talk about, but what I want to do is I'm guessing there might be some ideas, questions from all of you here. And I want to make sure we have time for that and we don't just cut it off really quickly. Um, any initial thoughts, questions for Colby, Alex, or Terry about anything they've talked about with AI or their businesses, et cetera?
My name is Andrew from CIBC. My question for you would be, what would be your lessons learned or the hurdles that you encountered that you would recommend others try to avoid when they're implementing or starting to leverage the AI capabilities?
Talk to your legal team early. And hello, fellow
one.
Canadian, right? I
Yeah.
said it yesterday in one of the mug meetings. I was surprised at some of the hurdles and some of the obstacles that our internal teams threw up. Obviously, there's an MSA with Medallia we got to sign off on, but making sure I had the right pitch to them right out of the gate answered questions that they didn't know they were going to have. For example, making sure they knew for smart response, somebody was in charge. Somebody actually had to read that response and check off the box to say it was okay. Answering that question right out of the gate, if I would have done that, would have saved me weeks. And when in doubt, take your lawyer out and get them just totally liquored up with tequila.
All right.
Best practice.
Andrew, I was going to say, just be realistic about where you are in the process. Don't overpromise. Go step by step and pick up some small wins early and go for bigger ones later.
Set expectations with the teams that you're going to have those features turned on. Smart response, a great example. Meet with them first, have them review the way that it's responding, and allow them to tell you how they would like it adjusted. I found that to be very effective. They feel like they're part of the solution and that the voice sounds like them. You can set up your smart responses by area, by group, and it's really helpful when it sounds like the team or the area of the organization that it is crafting a message for. And one other thing is consider, how widely you're going to use this, because one of the benefits that we are finding is that our branch managers, some of them, their writing skills are not just fantastic. So when they respond to customers, sometimes it's not in the voice that we would necessarily want,
They put
right?
the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. And the enabling smart response then allows you to put the brand voice on all responses. They just have to edit. If they want to, they can just edit some stuff, and they can. Well, one of the things that we ask them to do is every issue that comes out, you have to include a solution to that issue. I don't want AI giving a solution. This has to come from the branch manager. So it's a better crafted message. It sounds like the brand voice, and they're offering their solutions in it. So I think it's a way more effective way of responding to all customers' needs or just feedback.
Alex had such a great nugget. You just reminded me to the power of using your internal stakeholders and teams as co-creators.
Yep.
So they're almost part of the solution that's going out and driving that use, driving that interest. I mean, I think that's a nugget not just for AI, but for all CX. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good. So if you have a broader coalition who's supporting this, because you talked about sometimes inconsistency in delivering closed loop or kind of like conversations with the guests or customers, you have that because you're distributing the work now, but then you can have a tighter, more aligned voice of the brand that's actually more personal as well because more context is being taken in. Then you bring in brand and marketing and yeah, how do you want to have this? And that can become very interesting.
Specifically for smart response, another tip that I wish I would have like hit the DeLorean at 88 miles an hour. Talk to your marketing teams. A lot of your marketing teams are already using AI for some of their CMS, their content management. They've got a ton of these prompts that are already written, and at least for Medallia, is that voice of brand that kind of generates the things that the AI will pull from the response. They might already have that in the can, so you don't have to create a blank one sitting in the Portland airport after a couple glasses of wine.
Yeah, so there are two questions here. One was how do you validate, and then also kind of how do you kind of test or do kind of a second tier level of analysis concurrently? And I think it's a very interesting question too, because it kind of begs the question, how did you do it before AI with the people that were doing that, sometimes correctly, sometimes not correctly?
Intelligent summaries, it's easy. There is an option to download the data so you can actually compare what it's based off of against what you are seeing in the summary. But I also like to go a little extra. So when we were first implementing it, I was going through the area that we had it filtered on, and I was reading everything because I wanted to make sure that Medallia got it right. And luckily, it is true that they got it right. So I was literally cutting through all of the feedback, reading it manually, and I found that I just didn't have to do that much anymore.
Yeah. My confidence in the summaries is pretty high. So we've done some validation like that to say when it comes out, does it seem like if you're here and you were along the way running the business while you were here, does it seem like that's what's happening? Okay. The match is, in my opinion, very good. Some of the things we saw earlier today about some of the future products looked exciting as extensions of that, where it was going to extend to counting or sizing issues, also tacking on other things that would be interested to hoteliers like us, like suite numbers or something like that, or different tiers or different levels of customers. That takes work to get to today. So we're hoping the extensions we saw on the products help us get to those things faster as well.
Yeah, that's where we're at right now, fine tuning, because we send a ton of metadata behind the data layer that the customer is not giving us for those things.
Yep.
You know, you're going to get out of those some of the effort you put in tenfold, but you do have to put a little effort in out of the gate. And I find that we can play around a little bit with what we think is important. Does that make sense? I think I fumbled that.
Yeah.
one there, right?
Well, no, it's the parameters to the data is what you're talking
Yeah.
about, right? Where if it's a simple survey without context, you're only going to get so much.
Yeah, frame it around some of the key KPIs and some of the key questions that your C-suite, your senior stakeholders are asking you about. Find ways to get insights to action faster, right? Speed it up.
I think it's a really interesting question because I think for those, kind of keeping square at home, this is not a new thing for Medallia to have AI in the platform. In fact, we've had AI running on the platform for almost a decade through things like text analytics and theme explorer, right? I mean, these are very much AI generated insights that are on the platform. We're talking about generative AI now, right? Like that's a different kind of a world, but I bring up the text analytics example because I remember kind of early on, this was like 10, 11 years ago, there were still kind of like some conversation about like, well, hey, I actually want to have like a human coding to make sure the text analytics is telling me what a human would. And there were a couple kind of like little bake-off things that like you'd look at it. Basically, 9 times out of 10, the human was more unreliable than text analytics. Because what do you do when you're coding text? If anybody remembers doing that, it was a really fun job. But you you gotta wonder. You do what humans do. These pesky emotions and things like that. And and reliability. But great question. It's super critical. And I think it's a really key component also of like kind of building the coalition and saying, hey, this is why it can make sense.
And I also, to answer your second question, I have used the Gen AI themes to look for topics that I did not have covered, that I did not see before, in order to add those back to my my standard topics. But today, I don't use my topics that much. I use mainly themes to generate the insights that I need to make the organizational change. It's only when I need a topic that is a lot more brand specific, because before I built out everything.
And you're talking about themes with generative AI, which we haven't gotten too in depth on for this, but yeah, maybe you could talk just really, a little bit more about that. You touched on it, but yeah, like manual topic creation, either Medallia does it, you do it, a partner does it.
Right.
But now it sounds like you're kind of changing your approach, and maybe even based on some things we all saw this morning, it's going to, streamline a little more.
Right. Yeah, because the Gen AI backend will actually take all of your feedback that it's going through. It creates more robust topics out of it, and it gives you the same kind of look and feel that you're used to in maybe your Topics Explorer or your standard themes. But the information that you're getting out of it is a lot more robust, and sometimes even short sentences about what's really going on. And you're able to easily dive into those areas and get summaries for those topics that the theme explorer has bubbled up, and then dive again deeper and look at each and every single comment that is associated to that. So I had it for myself and for the CX team only, and not for more of the front end staff. But I switched that out, and now the front end staff, the IT team, they get access to the new themes.
Yeah, with the okay, that's super and it's running constantly on like the flow of data.
Exactly.
Do you have competing products from your own organization's AI teams that you are fighting with?
Yes. And yes here too.
No.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I like to be, I like to think CX is there to be a solution provider for the organization. And my approach has been to pull them in and full transparency. And when they have seen what's going on and time, speed to market for actually turning these things on, again, 15 minutes in Portland Airport, they're the ones telling me that although it's in similar silos and AI, they're coming to the realization that it's really not competing for resources for their AI initiatives. And at the end of the day, that's when I found the conversation is really sticky. It's not necessarily about the tool or the value that it can bring to the organization. It's who's getting funded, who needs the extra money for it, because it's already included in MEC. We're good to go, right?
yeah. I'm concerned at Venetian. We just enabled 1,100 knowledge workers with a prominent AI solution. We're going to have to be careful about which we use for what purposes and things. So I don't know how that's going to work out yet, but some of the same things you're thinking about, we're thinking about there. That's going to need to be worked out.
Critical component with that, I think, for everybody to think about is what do you want to do in what system, and what is each system good at, and how do you have it deployed, right? I don't think anybody at Medallia would tell you that Medallia is the one-stop shop for all AI insight in your organization. That's not what we're going for here. Think about what you use Medallia for, what are Medallia's superpowers, and then how can AI embedded within that workflow make it phenomenally better. So I think that's kind of the thing. And I know there's complexity to your question, because it's also all of a sudden, if people can ask anything about your organization, then it gets cloudy. All of a sudden they have a different idea of what customer experience is.
Right.
And there's layers to this without a doubt.
Almost everything you buy is going to either have AI solutions or claim to have AI solutions. So how those fit together and where the overlap is or what you're going to use for what purpose is important conversation.
Yeah.
We're in a new area, right? I mean, some of us have been using it now for a couple of years, some of us only a year.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was an awesome conversation. I thought it was really neat to get the cross industry, but all super high stakes, high transaction volume, which I think is a key component of this. Like, these are very high, let's call it table stakes, because we're in Vegas type interactions. So really appreciated the conversation, and I really appreciated the questions. I think these are kind of three of the more important themes that have come up today. Enjoy the rest of your time at Experience. If you have any other questions for us, I know we'll be hanging out for a little bit. There's some great sessions that we've got coming up. There's also a QR code if you want to share any feedback. ideas, thoughts, reflections with us about how this was. And I am Geoff at Medallia.com, Geoff. I'm always happy to have a conversation and be at your service for any way that I can help. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks.